Yes. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen and members of future audiences for years to come, we welcome Jan as the Prime Minister of the
Mr. Chair, we think that in Western democracies, we think that we should welcome the government's exaggeration of casualties and future implication of epidemic diseases. Now, in today's debate, it's very important for us to clarify what do we mean by exaggeration. In today's debate, when you talk about exaggeration, we won't be talking about lying to people. We will be talking more about the way we're going to present or angle the information that we're going to give the society. We're going to show, for example, like more visceral images. We'll be the ones selecting information in the news, like capturing maybe the worst case scenario of certain situation in order for us to ignite emotional reaction. There are two things that I wanted to discuss in my speech in order for us to clarify and justify why should this be, the stance that the government should be taking. One is that I want to talk about the responsibility of the government to guide the people's comprehension of casualties and future implication of these epidemic diseases. And second, we need to understand the very nature of people in today's debate. Now, on the first argument, let's talk about this responsibility of the government to guide people's comprehension on casualties when it comes to future implication. Just like what your theme mentioned, there's a social contract that the government must fulfill. As the father of the nation, they need to make sure that they need to look after its citizens in making in making them understand what really the situation is all about, and making sure that we get their attention. Because it's also very important for us to understand the nature of these epidemic diseases. That when you talk about epidemic diseases like Ebola, there are no cure, and these can easily be spread once it's actually out there. That the best solution in situations like this is only containment. That without proper care, we argue that it could lead, and it has already led to a lot of number of deaths. However, we understand the worry that like the opposition would be saying that maybe to some extent, the moment you do all of these things, it might cause panic on the society. One, we don't think this is actually true, because apparently, when you use all of this information, when you show it on TV, you'll be, providing some information anyway that this would be to some extent might be alarming or whatnot. But the idea there is that also after watching these shows, there would be a specific time lapse for these individuals to be able to comprehend this. These exaggerations would only serve like a mind bomb on these individuals to get their attention of the society. Because as we understand, in the world that we're living now, like there are plethora, or there's too much information already, that we need to have a specific way in getting the attention of these people. And we think, coming from the government side, this is one of the best ways to do it, especially when it comes to, guiding the citizens in better understanding cases like epidemic diseases. But before anything else.
So if it suits the father government's interests, will the government also underwhelm the risks?
Yeah. To some extent, that's basically the goal, Like, what we're talking about the risk here is that when it comes to the risk of responding to the diseases. Because what the opposition needed to prove in today's debate is that how are you going to become objective when it comes to providing all of this information? Because we think there's a very gray area when it comes to the objectivity of the information that they're going to present to the people, right? Because apparently they will be taking certain angles anyway. Because if it's too factual, academic or scientific, it would be boring. We don't think that would be effective. Because in that particular situation, they need to defend that, right? Because apparently, we also need to understand the nature of people. And this is the most important thing also that we need to understand, like how human beings, like society, citizens in liberal democracies, in the day and age of social media, there's a plethora of information that people are taking, that people are exposed to a lot of random, if not less or lack of credibility of information, like for example, doomsday and whatnot. So what happens here is that, and then also we also need to couple and complicate the situation by discussing that. Also, given all of this complicated situation when it comes to social media, people are also caught up with their own lives, right? So the conclusion that we wanted to draw here is that human beings, especially in liberal democracy, are slightly indifferent, to some extent apathetic, right? If not also, maybe there would be some, you would also have issues when it comes to individuals who are not educated, who won't be able to appreciate whatever objective information that you need. That's why you need all of those images, right? So the implication that we wanted to provide here is that we think that people will be responding to epidemic diseases in a more serious manner. But before, further explaining this, last point.
So if people find out that the government exaggerated stuff later, won't they lose trust in the government?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, you've seen how the government exaggerates in Singapore, Korea when it comes to smoking, right? They start showing you like weird photos of your lungs. Do people really lose trust in their government? They love their government now, right? Because apparently they cater information and it allows, discussion and allows awareness and consciousness. Now, let's go back to my case. Let's talk about people. Given the fact that to some extent there are uneducated people, apathetic or indifferent people in this society because of the context that I discussed, once you contextualize this debate when it comes to epidemic diseases, we draw another conclusion coming from the government side that people don't take it seriously, Sadly, people don't care unless they're affected. That's why we need to do this. They don't understand the severity of the situation. Even if you factor in especially proximity of these countries, right? For example, Ebola, and you talk about United States and United Kingdom. The idea that they're far from the place where this epidemic is actually happening, the reaction that you would get coming from the society is that they don't care about this situation. Even if actually we say that when it comes to nearby countries, to some extent, these people, even though there's close proximity, we think that they can't also comprehend the latent harms. Because most often than not, human beings do suffer from hyperbolic discounting. We always look into the immediate benefits and we always discount the long-term harms. So that's why this is very important. So that's why at the end, what we're saying coming from the government side is that the moment we do this, the moment that the government would specifically choose and angle information when it comes to informing, important details when it comes to epidemic diseases, we say that the moment we do this, we create awareness. The awareness that we will be getting is something different from what we have from a very apathetic situation. Because at the end, we can't afford anything against, this fight. Because to begin with, there's no cure. The only best way for us to approach this is to prevent it. And for us to best prevent all of these things is to make sure that everyone is on the same page. That everyone is aware and actually, to some extent, well informed when it comes to these diseases. So that's why in situations like this, if the government is in the best position to create and get the attention of these individuals and throw, and fire a mind bomb to them so that we can get their attention, we welcome all of these things. Thanks.
Mind bomb. Too much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. We call the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we think fear is a horrible tool for persuasion, especially when government uses it. We think it's abhorrent that Side Proposition Jen came up to the podium and proudly declared that fear should be the one that's controlling and manipulating people's mindsets. So I'm going to talk about two questions in today's debate. Number one, what is the right thing to do? What is the principal obligation that each liberal democracies have towards their citizens? Surprise, surprise, the theme is social contract. Secondly, what are the practical consequences? How do we best deal with this crisis or like epidemic disease? But before that, although most of the rebuttals will be integrated, I'm going to deal with their soft stats. Because they said that we're not going to technically lie. We're just going to continuously show horrible images of people dying and puking and bleeding out of those epidemic diseases. Firstly, when they said that we at the same time should take some angle, we will support a most balanced angle that governments can provide. Yes, so if there are some people, puking and bleeding, we will show that. But to the same extent, if there are people who are surviving from that disease, we will also show them to take the balanced angle. So if the epidemic is serious enough so that only everybody is bleeding and puking, government do not have to exaggerate that and just show puking and bleeding diseases. The burden that you guys have to take is that government is knowingly instilling fear and that exaggerating knowingly. Secondly, he said people don't lose trust because when government shows horrific images regarding smoking in their cigarette pack, people don't lose trust in that. Well, exactly. If you're taking a soft stance, you're also at the very same time compromising all your benefits because showing horrific images inside cigarette pack did not do much in reducing smoking rate in Korea, Mr. Speaker. What actually did lower the smoking rate was like the numbers, Mr. Speaker, increasing the cost and like putting more additional syntax. So the numbers are the things that matter, and like showing graphic images and taking a soft stance will not do much good for their benefit as well. But finally, if this is very, very disgusting and it's horrible and traumatizing to the extent that people will automatically get fear right away, we think that brings counter effect, and that people get disgusted. People choosing not to opt into those channels that shows that kind of news and gives you information about epidemic disease because they're so traumatized and those pictures and graphic images are so horrible. We think that's counterproductive. First, clash. What is the principal obligation of each liberal democracy along with social contract? We think the primary obligation of any government is not to lie, and this includes exaggeration, knowing exaggeration, because the social contract explicitly states that you should provide honest and sincere information and not lie to their people. No, thank you. Now, this right to know is important, Mr. Speaker, because it expands the other fundamental right as well. For example, the right to your bodily autonomy, given that information becomes the basis of your action, of what kind of medication that you will take, or what kind of housing choices that you will make, or where to live in and whatnot. So they are largely disregarding the fundamental rights that people have by knowingly providing wrong information to these people when government actually think that this is not a serious problem. So like portraying this as if it was very, very severe. No, thank you, sir. But secondly, we think that government should respect people's rationality. It's abhorrent and offensive to say that people cannot respond rationally to epidemic diseases. People are automatically empathetic, and that you can't trust people's rationality. You have to install this mind bomb to those people, Mr. Speaker. We think like you should treat people like adults, like give them their balanced view and give them the truth, and then like see how people respond to it, because individuals have different personal calculation and trade-off, Mr. Speaker. So if I think that leaving my house as of now and risking my health to some extent, because I personally think that this epidemic disease is not going to be affecting me that much in my life, that is a personal calculus that individuals should be respected to made of. Government cannot unilaterally make this calculus that this epidemic disease is too severe for you to not consider in your personal calculus. Therefore, we should force you to leave your house by showing you constant horrible images, Mr. Speaker. But finally, aside from that individual calculus, we think the method of fear is extremely, extremely immoral and dangerous, especially in liberal democracies. Why is that? Because you're punishing people and coercing agony to people. They conceded that these images will be horrible, traumatizing. We think the government shouldn't be able to knowingly, intentionally traumatize people and coerce them with psychological damage, Mr. Speaker, when those people have not done anything wrong. Go.
There are traumatizing images everywhere right now in society, even in your entertainment. Come on!
Okay, so government should do its best job into discouraging those traumatizing images if they are traumatizing. But secondly, government should not be the actor in promoting and encouraging those traumatizing images, obviously, Mr. Speaker. So we don't think that POI was relevant to this debate. Alright, let's move on to the second analysis, second argument, and the chunk of arena regarding practical consequences. Firstly, we think the same thing in the premise applies. People will start losing trust because they know that there's a prospect of government exaggerating, or according to their POI response, underwhelming the impact of certain instances when they deem that the government see fit. We think when people start losing trust, it's harder for a government to gather political capital effectively and implement nationwide policies efficiently. We think two horrible things will happen. Number one, even when you're telling the truth and not exaggerating, people will think that you're exaggerating in that epidemic disease, because if your characterization that people are apathetic, people will be more apathetic, given that people will start assuming that even when government is telling the truth, the government is lying and exaggerating about the epidemic disease. So the kind of diseases that do not directly influence their life, for example, foot and mouth disease, which mostly influence pigs and farmers, Mr. Speaker, city people will be apathetic to that, although that problem might be serious. People will assume that those instances are exaggerated by the government. But secondly, this leads to slippery slope, because Jen admitted that other cases might be applicable. So people will assume that governments will be able to underestimate or overestimate some information or the impact of casualties in other areas, for example, security. An excellent example of this is U.S. Bush administration, when they intentionally exaggerated the threat of terrorism, saying that Iraq hit WMD, when it was later found out that there were like many reasons for that US government to not think that. When there was whistleblowing from Edward Snowden, the government was keeping internal information regarding PRISM and private information of people lost trust, and now there are surveys going on, like people responding, saying that they cannot trust any information regarding government when they're providing information regarding terrorism and whatnot. We think, moreover, this fear clouds out rationality, because fear is a primary factor that clouds rationality. So you're making people panic and go on wasting social costs. We saw this happening in Korea-US FTA. When the impact of the disease, natural disease, were over-exaggerating, massively people were going out and protesting against government, and that caused a lot of social costs because of the over-exaggerated fear of mad cow disease. We think the distribution of medical infrastructure, medical resources will be ineffective because people overreact, panic, because they cloud out rationality. We think both in principle and practice this is a horrible, horrible idea. It's immoral and abhorrent. We're happy to oppose.
Thank you very much, Mr. Opposition Leader. We call the Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Chair, in the case when a disease has no cure, and the best method to protect the people is, and the only method there is to protect the people is in prevention, is in awareness, and is keeping society aware of what is going on, we think that a responsible government needs to hedge all its best bets. And in this case, it's the same thing as selectively choosing the kind of material that you present to the public in order to get the response necessary. I will now talk about how this idea of public support is not just about prevention. The images that you bring to a society is not just about prevention, but also about response and action, which we think is clearly lacking when it comes to Western governments in the case of dealing with epidemic diseases. But before I move on into those arguments, let's look at the arguments that's been brought up by the government and rebut them one by one. First argument, that it is a principal obligation of a government to present a balanced view, and because the social contract explicitly states that. I didn't know the social contract was a document that's explicitly written somewhere. So that on itself is already a mischaracterization. But the point is, how does a government function? A government has to be utilitarian. The job of a government is to ensure the best possible protection for the most number of people. And we think that if that is the case, what should a government do, a responsible government do, in terms of painting the picture, of painting the seriousness of what is going on with epidemic diseases? And we've told you that in most cases, epidemic diseases is seen as there's a lull in society in how we handle or deal with the cases of epidemic diseases. So they say that we will have, a balanced report. But the problem is, those images that you continue to show has to be unified in a single action for them to be consistent in the message that you send. If you tell people, oh, people are dying, but things are going to be okay, and therefore you must make your own decision on what is good and bad for you, we think that's okay in the case of like smoking and stuff like that, because those are personal decisions. But in the case of an epidemic disease, where you can go out and bring your germs to other people, you go to school and infect the kids in school, and you go on a plane and infect everyone on the plane, we think that there's a marked difference in those cases. Yes.
If this disease is factually actually that contagious and that dangerous, you don't have to exaggerate. Tell people you'll get it and you'll die and you'll spread it. People will respond rationally upon because they like living.
Here.
No, you see, the thing is, exaggeration here in this case, like in where or how you are living in those areas, particularly currently how the diseases are not, spreading already in those countries. So we think that there's a difference, and that distance has to mandate the response, right? So by the time you want to tell your truth, but people are living and dying it'll be too late. That's the problem, isn't it? Prevention is better than cure. So let's look at the second idea, is that people lose trust in the government because, for example, in the case of Iraq, they didn't find the weapons of mass destruction. Well, first of all, lying to the people is different than exaggeration again. The reason why people start getting angry with the American government is because they were spying on people and they were lying to the people. So obviously that was a difference again. Secondly, in terms of the trauma when the riots happened in Seoul, we told you, well, first of all, that it created more discourse and awareness on what was happening with the Chorus FTA. I think that's good. So let's look at then the third question of this debate.
Okay.
This idea of how it actually creates public support for action. Like we pointed out, governments are utilitarian in nature, but the nature of diseases and where it happens, particularly in today's world, essentially falls in countries that are poor, countries that don't have the kind of necessary medical responses, and they really, really need international support. And what is happening right now in West Africa is that you don't have enough medical response. You don't have enough support from the Western government. People are apathetic to the plight because they feel that this is a disease that don't reach them. So essentially, what a government needs to do is the government needs to create the political will and support for action that is necessary, the kind of donations that has to be given to these countries. And we think that a government using the images in this case is the same as advertising. We think that there's no difference in how this practice is very common in the wake of any tragedy and is utilized by any kind of NGOs when you want to gather support and donation from the people. That's why you walk along the streets here in Korea and you see posters of people dying in Myanmar and children not starving. It's the same kind of mentality that advertisers use when they want to sell their products. You over-sexualize women in order to get people to like it. We don't like it. We don't necessarily have to like it. But we think that it is an end that justifies the means. Mostly because images have the capacity to change public sentiments. Like for example, in the case of the Tiananmen Square, the tank ban, how that changed it, how the burning girl and the hanging soldiers changed the entire tide of support for the Vietnam War, and then how the images of the small image of the small boy's hand in the missionary's hand actually changed and increased support and donations to starving children in Africa. What do you have to say about that?
So according to the characterization, even when the epidemic disease is actually serious, if it's not happening in your society, these apathetic people will remain apathetic because they assume the government is exaggerating.
No, the problem here is that you want people to start taking precautions once the disease hits your country. But we think that precaution has to start way before that. Knowledge and awareness of what's going on in the world has to start way before that. So that's why we think that in this sense, not lying, exaggeration and selective choices of images is actually good for a government. So let's look at what we've told you today. First of all, we told you that the characterization of this case and this particular case in terms of epidemic diseases is different than a government having an agenda and a political will of trying to control its people. We think it's completely different. Mainly because the nature of these diseases themselves don't have any cure. They don't have any cure. They're easily spread through contact, through air, through breathing. So we think that this mandates an emergency in response. We've also told you that the nature of people today is that they're apathetic, they're a little disinterested because modern life has created that kind of condition when we function in. It's regrettable, but that is the reality of it. So why do we think that governments have to guide the kind of conditioning that they want for people in order to respond? We tell you that just as people advertise, just as people want, as NGOs do advertisements in order to gain emotional response, a government then, a morally right or justified government, would choose to do this as well. Because it's not just about the prevention of people, but about attending to the issues of the epidemic diseases that is ravaging society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Minister. We call the Deputy Minister about
Mr. Speaker, I have a distrust of my government. You've lived in my country, you clearly understand why. But I think it's healthy for every citizen to have an active distrust of your government because the government has so much power. right? They have more power than I actually know. Quite literally, because I don't actually know all the things that they're doing. And which is why we think the position of government team today is very worrying. We don't think that what healthy government relationship in regards to social contract with the people is to assume that the people are stupid, or assume that the people are unable to make decisions for their own, or are more likely to make poor decisions for their own. The clashes in this debate, Mr. Speaker, I think are the same as when Junbin highlighted them at the start of his speech. The first one being the principal role of the government and how should government balance this very difficult position. And secondly, what are the consequences and how people are going to react. I'm going to extend upon the consequences. I'm going to talk about how it's going to harm people with the disease and dealing with the disease in the future. And what you're going to do is more likely stigmatize those individuals and get people like cut them out completely, right? And I'm going to talk about why this is going to lead to abuse, right? The check and balance inherently will fail with this balance. No, thank you, Lin. So firstly, let's look at this question of the role of government stuff. And as Lin spoke about also in the speech, he said, look, we need to protect people because there's this gap between how people should react based on this information, how they are reacting. This disease is too dangerous and there is absolutely no cure. We think this is difficult. How actually should people react? Who gets to decide, Mr. Speaker, what my reaction should be? How far I should run from this disease? What are the things I need to give up in order to react to this fear? Should I leave my home? Should I leave my house? Should I sell everything? Like what is the proper reaction of an individual within the sphere of this disease? When the tsunami warning came in Japan, Mr. Speaker, some people chose to stay in their homes. We think that you can look back and say like those people were crazy, they shouldn't have. But it was a decision that they made. Because they preferred living in their house or dying in their house or going to safety and losing their house. Some of the people who did stay in their house didn't lose their homes and died. Some people who left and came back found their homes looted and taken stuff from other people. Either way, nobody really knows what is the real outcome, what you should do. In that situation, the government needs to act as a neutral arbiter of the information and give to the best knowledge that they have, not actually what they can do, right? Because if you think about this, what you're saying is you're worried about the people who are not worried about Ebola. Right? And in order to do that, you want to make people even more rational. If you give people the truth, you have these two stakeholders. You have the ones that are worried about it and think rationally and protect themselves. Then you have the ones who are irrational and not worried about it. Your reaction shouldn't be to encourage more irrationality, Mr. Speaker, and try to create more visceral overreactions. Your position should be to recognize the fact that people should be responsible for the decisions that they make. They say, well, this is a special situation because there's no cure. We think that what you're doing is also then highlighting, emphasizing this. You're giving up on whether or not there can or cannot be a cure, but that's also a little factually wrong because some people have indeed survived Ebola. And maybe you kind of bought into your own fear, and we're not saying that will encourage people to go and get Ebola. We think if you do that, that is natural survival or evolution working from Darwinian perspective, but we really don't think that's going to happen, right? So the position is to give that information. What are the consequences then? How are people going to react? What we think will happen is what Junbin said will happen. People will lose trust in the government. People won't believe the government even when the government is telling the truth, because this will inevitably get exposed later if it does, and it leads to this huge social cost. No, thank you, that people end up making irrational reactions, right? She said, Lin said it's a good, the whole CUDS FDA thing created discussion and discourse. No, it didn't. It delayed the FDA. In the end, they did it anyway, right? But for many, many years, we did it because we thought people dressed up in cow suits was a good reason to not vote for the FDA. It wasn't. It was a ridiculous reason. We held back a lot of progress. We disadvantaged many consumers who were eating much nicer beef in their process. There were lots and lots of loss, Mr. Speaker. In the end, rationality prevailed and people were like, yeah, we're not all really going to get mad cow disease from eating American beef. So there was a loss to society from people overreacting. Sure.
Well, it wasn't the government that promoted this idea of mad cow disease in the first place, right? A lot of it was internet foray, but an epidemic disease is a real and present danger.
Sure, exactly. But our point is that when people get exaggerated and run away with this fear, what is their basic outcome? The point, even though the government wasn't the ones pushing this information, they didn't really, they were trying to. Well, they wanted the FDA to go through, but when people acted irrationally to that fear, then the outcome was that people didn't end up making the right decisions. Government do this all the time, Mr. Speaker. They create a big threat, they try to build up nationalism, they create an other in order to sway people's opinion towards one thing which you want or the other. And we think that's exactly what's happening here. And I don't trust the government to make the better decision for me, Mr. Speaker. I think what the government's position should always be to put the experts in front to give you that information and help you find the information. Now, why will this be better? We've already told you how that's going to create all these harms. They say that we have a society that's apathetic. We think this encourages society to distrust information. This encourages society to say, like, you can't trust anything that you read, so you might as well, I don't know, become more religious or something, right? We say that's also going to be harmful in the long run. Lynn says we need to be careful, we need to be worried about all these West Africans who are dying from diseases. We think that's not really an issue about you changing the citizens' minds to your own country. It's about you just giving aid to these countries because you know the problem. But the worst possible thing you can do is put pictures of starving Africans on the street, Mr. Speaker, and say, this is why we should care. Nothing stigmatizes those individuals a lot more than you making some kind of charity porn out of them, Mr. Speaker. And we think that's terrible. What this does is it normalizes these images of death and dying of these individuals. These are all, when you think of an African or West African from Ebola, he's someone who's bleeding out of his anus, Mr. Speaker, because those are the visceral images that they want to show. We think furthermore, it stigmatizes individuals who have survived these diseases. Who survived, if you think about AIDS, Mr. Speaker, just 15 years ago it was a disease that you couldn't live if you had AIDS. And if someone did get AIDS, because of your prevention better than cure campaign, anybody who had AIDS, Mr. Speaker, becomes an untouchable, like literally untouchable, because you think you'd get AIDS if you touch that human being. We think this is completely irrational behavior, which is really harmful to those individuals. But we think it's even more powerful because, you highlighted the fact that when NGOs do it, becomes such a big deal. With governments, you have little to no check and balance, Mr. Speaker. You can have journalists to come out and say things, you can have individuals shout against them, but the government has the dominant hold on this information. We wouldn't know about the misinformation in the Obama administration and torture if not for the leaks of Edward Snowden, Mr. Speaker. If those things hadn't happened, we will never get this information. What this will do then is it will take us down towards the path of abuse. It will take us down towards the path, Mr. Speaker, of governments doing things for their own way because the power will corrupt them. At the end of the day, even if individuals do stupid things, they are the ones doing those stupid things to themselves. I would rather do a stupid thing myself than have a government do a stupid thing to me, because I think that's far more likely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Opposition Leader. We call the government whip. Mr. Felix.
Firstly, I would like to congratulate the leader of the opposition for buying that pants. It's really, really nice. I too don't have trust in my government because I'm from Malaysia and I've lived there. But I also don't have trust in the opposition. Mr. Chair, what I'm going to do is a few things. Firstly, I'm going to answer this question about the social contract, the theme of this debate, right? Can a utilitarian government guide the comprehension of its own citizens to achieve a greater good? And then I'm going to talk about the practical, in fact, first I'm going to talk about the practical outcome that they wanted to talk about, and then I'll answer the question about can a utilitarian government make decisions for its own people. So firstly, the argument that came from that side, they had three harms on that side. First, or no, four, because Logan had a substantive towards the end. So firstly, they said that people will lose trust in the government. Once they find out that governments have been exaggerating facts, people will lose trust. We had two responses to this early on. We said that this is not a lie, and secondly, there is no distinct and concrete harms to the government doing this if you compare, at the end of this debate, the benefits that we have provided. But thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, we think that the trust in the government is linked to so many other factors. People are not dumb according to them. People judge a government based on the economic policies or the immigration policies. Just because people find out that the government did something, exaggerated images for example, people would not immediately lose trust in the government and not cooperate with the government, ladies and gentlemen. That is ridiculous. But in a lot of these democracies, governments also change. So we think that that also allows people to have, to renew their trust in the government, assuming that people lose trust in the government. So we think that that harm, that is not like a distinct harm that will, that doesn't require this particular policy. Please sit down. Secondly, they said that, you know what will happen? Fear and trauma will take place. Not really. Lynn already told you that there are other things, movies, there are other things that we already show in the media that doesn't cause trauma to people. In fact, we can have parental guidance, warnings, or like warn people first before showing these images, like we do in CNN and BBC already. But if trauma is such a big issue on that side, they supported a balanced view, which means that they also are going to show images of people puking and bleeding out of their ass, ladies and gentlemen. So if trauma is such a big issue, under their balanced view, people will still get traumatized when they view these kinds of things. So we don't think that that harm is a distinct harm from our policy. Lastly, Logan tried to argue that this will stigmatize people in Africa. He tried to argue, ladies and gentlemen. So, this will stigmatize people in Africa, people will have stereotypes over the people living there. Two responses. Firstly, under their characterization that people are smart in a democracy, we don't think people will immediately place judgments on other people just because of the images that we show, right? Secondly, there are other alternative medias in which people can learn about Africa and learn that not everyone is poor and starving and thin in Africa, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that's a ridiculous point. Lastly, panic. This whole argument about how people will go crazy after they hear this news. Firstly, we're talking about liberal democracies and asking people to prevent them from being infected of these diseases, ladies and gentlemen. That means the proximity to African countries is not it's not close proximity. So therefore we think that the panic that they're trying to talk about doesn't happen. But Jan already told you in his speech that there is a time lag for people to comprehend and understand what the government has showed to them and make the decision. It's not like screaming fire in a theater that will cause a stampede, ladies and gentlemen. It's you sitting on your couch at home, watching the TV, ladies and gentlemen, and understanding and comprehending what to do. So you will be able to rationalize what has been shown to you. But before that, yes, Joseph.
Your case relies on people overreacting, having a visceral reaction to these cases. So if someone can go to alternative media and get a rational view, how do you still get the urgency that you want?
No. So we already told you that people are often desensitized with decentralized information that they have online. When you scroll down your timeline, there's a lot of things that are happening. The desensitization comes from information that are not verified. That is why we propose that there should be a single nexus of messaging that is credible and verified information by the government. That is why people will trust our information a lot more rather than the alternatives that are out there. And that is why we think we will still achieve the net benefits that we want. So now let's move on to can a utilitarian government guide the comprehension of its own citizens? And this is where we think that in a democracy, especially after elections, you have voted your government, you have already given the mandate for the government to make certain decisions because the government cannot consult you in every single decision that they make. So there are several characteristics of people that we already talked to you about. Firstly, the desensitization to decentralized information. Jan already told you that people are busy with their lives, hence they're not stupid, but they're indifferent, ladies and gentlemen, to these kinds of harms. They're also unable to comprehend latent harms because it's not palpable. People make decisions for instant gratification. Even if you give them objective news, ladies and gentlemen, it's boring and it doesn't create the kind of reaction that we want under this side. Hence, people are structurally incapable of understanding decisions that government make for collective safety, ladies and gentlemen. Governments, on the other hand, have experts that advise them. They also have information, they have statistics, ladies and gentlemen, and they know the bigger picture and what is required to do to save the people on the ground. And that is why we think that the governments are able, because of the mandate and because of the capacity and information that the government has, allows them to guide the comprehension of people in the way they want it to be. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, governments doesn't allow classified information to be out in the public because, government can still censor certain things that they deem is important for collective safety. If they don't want governments to lie to their own people, then they are defending allowing government secrets, classified information to be out in the open, ladies and gentlemen, because we don't know what the government is doing behind closed doors. We don't know what the decisions that the governments are making for us. We think that is a moral inconsistency in the case if they support that and not support our particular policy. At the end of this debate, we have to recognize that this is just the right of the government to advertise, right? You can downplay things, you can exaggerate things. We already have allowed other corporations to advertise in the way in which they want, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that as much as the harm of trauma might take place, at best that trauma also exists on the dead side. As much as losing trust takes place, ladies and gentlemen, we told you that governments change. We told you that people are not stupid and are able to understand that there are other things that factors in having trust in the government. So therefore, we think on our side we have provided more net benefits, and it's comparably bigger than the harms that they provided into this debate, and that's why we propose.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Whip. Speaker, we call the opposition whip.
Mr. Speaker, there's a saying that you can't have your cake and eat it too. The problem with the proposition is it's keep on moving around. First they say that we're going to traumatize these people so much, it's going to be so new, that it's going to urge people to do things that they normally would not. Then they say, oh, but it's okay because there's so much other trauma in Hollywood, and also in Fox News Network, and Simpsons, so basically they won't be that traumatized. We have a question. How effective is your policy? What exactly are you doing when you have a soft case that is so soft that the first speaker says that it's not going to be a lie, it's going to be within the gradations of facts, but slightly more graphic. So we don't really get it. They say, can we guide people? I would like to ask the same thing. Can you? Two questions. Can you, in a practical sense, can you actually make differences if you're going for something that's so insignificantly indifferent from the status quo? Or the second question, can you, as in should you be allowed to, if it is successful, to break social contract with the notion that we have given up certain liberties to the government, and so in that you will in return give us safety and security, but first and foremost in a Western liberal democracy also respect our liberties and also our freedoms. You can't do either because you keep on moving around. I don't know what you're talking about, so we'll do both. Before that, Shafiq has lost his touch because he's now starting to talk about new argumentation in the whip speech. National security, if there's any secrets or no secrets, what about bomb codes for the nuclear bombs? Here's a difference, Mr. Speaker. There's a difference where the government cannot reveal certain aspects of its functions of the government, so to ensure the existence of the government. And also it doesn't ensure or exaggerate people to motivate them to do things that they would otherwise, if they did not know that information and therefore did nothing, would not directly harm them or hurt them. That is the biggest difference from national security. There's also this other thing, like trauma is good. We argue that trauma should be where trauma is due. If there is a factual problem where it indeed should require people to be shocked and awed and move into directions where there's a tsunami coming in 30 minutes, fine. We don't exaggerate that fact. We simply say that the logistics of the computers are saying that you're going to die if you stay there. Make your decision. So there's no need for you to consider all these other things about Ebola or all these other hypothetical situations, what ifs or what nots. There is no necessity or need, but please sit down. We think that this is, well, crazy. Finally, they say that, oh, we'll only do this. Like, Shafiq has a very interesting idea. Like, we'll only do this for unverified information. That perfectly negates Lynn's whole argument, because she's talking about we're going to post up more graphic pictures of starving African kids so that you'll pay more charity to West Africa because they're starving. Which basically is a problem because he also conceded that, look, African kids, we can look it up on the internet. Well, the moment that you do that, you negate your trustworthiness and also your trauma, because now you reveal that it's actually not that problematic. We have three classes to provide you today. First, social contract in the Western liberal democracy. What should you do? There's two things that is kind of clear. You should not defraud your people, and you should not lie to your people to provide them with falsified motives to do irrational things. Rational people will also get affected, Mr. Speaker, if this is effective. They said that people are stupid. What about the grand majority that are people that are not stupid? Because you're saying that these people are so stupid and can't be educated, we need to give them a little boost to do what they're supposed to. Rational people will equally take that information, overshoot the thresholds and the threat levels, and will act irrational, never dealt with. If it is effective, yes.
What is your yardstick of objective reporting, and how would that report be presented to the people?
Whatever it is, it's better than what they openly admitted, that we are going to exaggerate. We will knowingly tell people something that is not true. Something's better than that, at least. Second, it will also people are desensitized by cigarette packages or whatnot, so it doesn't work as well. But we think that the whole point of fraud and losing accountability to the government that you entrusted, you're not there because someone died and made you king. We voted you in to trust you to provide information. And when you go around passing around like the Korean government says, like, oh, you know what, like the Seoul ferry, everyone is surviving. Then, oh wait, everyone died. The Bay of Tonks problem, oh, our boats got shot down, so we need to fight Vietnam. Every time you lie, every time you cause people, it causes unnecessary, wanton death, grief, and sadness that you will not be able to reconcile. Also, we have the second clash, future impacts and political capital. Never ever engage. We said that the normal everyday purpose of a government is to disseminate proper information. We also said that in many cases the government is the sole person to disseminate it. But when you cry wolf and people cannot differentiate when you are lying, when you are exaggerating, when you're not exaggerating, then your everyday function to do what a government should be gets compromised because people don't know when you are exaggerating, when you're not exaggerating, when you're being objective. That's the weird thing that you want to look about. Because you said this is an exceptional case. And furthermore, they say that it's not even urgent. There's a time frame. If it's a time frame, then we'll get to this as well. Educate them. It doesn't really take that hard. You know, take 3 or 4 days if it's not urgent. Tell them that Ebola is incurable. Don't go to Africa. That's easy enough. Furthermore, we also know they cheated the people to spend tax money on an African charity run. That's the whole point from the second speaker. No, again, false pretexts. If people want to spend tax money with their own pocket money to do so, let them do so rationally. Don't go around doing so, but also a POI. If they're so irrational or they're so empathetic, that won't help. You know why? I keep on seeing these pictures. I'm a sociopath. You don't care about Africa. Doesn't solve anything anyway. But what you do is that you lose political capital. You lose future trust. And the government now loses its capacity in everyday operations to be able to persuade and guide people when it has to. Third, education. The caution and awareness that the proposition talks about is easily done with providing actual objective information. Don't eat shellfish because you might get food poisoning. This is what we should do. Not like Old Testament ways where if you eat shellfish, you'll go to hell and die. We probably tried that in the Bronze Age days. It works better when people also are taken as agents of proper rationality and they will have a more cooperative relationship. There's a reason why Christians are losing a lot of their believers because they take them as idiots. You don't want the government to do that as well. Second of all, there's also a reason why the flight safety, like advertisements in planes, talk in a calm and distinctive manner. Why? Because if you keep on showing people dying from a plane crash, one, nobody will fly, which is an irrational decision on one hand, or they will just disregard it because they think it's exaggeration. Again, a loss. Finally, they finally talked about the aspects of cigarettes and advertising. That's the point. Advertisements are different from proper briefings of information that the government provides so that the people can base decisions upon. Make your clear differences and differentiate what you are doing in a government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hope Speaker. And we ask the opposition to give its rebuttal. Try drinking oil. Try drinking oil.
Wow.
Works for cars. No, I'm just kidding.
Mr. Speaker, the onus is on this side of the house, right? On the government side, you have to defend some form of line. And I think that's only the best. You have to take a hard line with this. If you can take that hard line and say, I'm going to exaggerate, I'm going to lie, I think 50 people will die, but I'll tell you 500 people, because I think that's going to be the best. Anything else, and then you end up being wishy-washy. And I think that's what's happened in this debate. I'm going to spend half of my reply speech showing that wishy-washiness. And I'm going to ask the question about whether people will react rationally, and what is and what are we willing to do if people don't react rationally, or to what extent is that this notion of rationality play in this debate? But firstly, this exaggeration versus lying. So I think that the goalpost moved quite a bit. First, it was like not exaggerate the numbers; it would exaggerate using Photoshop, right, and then exaggerate using visceral images. Towards the end, Shafiq was like, we just want a single nexus of information where people can get information, Mr. Speaker. It's about the government's right to advertise, basically. Basically, you just want like a centralized bulletin board, or the government to be able to use Facebook, which we think you can do that, but then the more softer you get, unfortunately, you fall within your own context. It's the problem that you set up, they set up at the start of this debate, which was there's too much information and we can't tell the differences between all this information. So you need to take a step. You need to be different far enough, and you need to concede that you are going to have a significant impact on people. And the debate is whether or not it's fair for you to do that, and secondly, what are the consequences of you doing that? Shafiq asked an interesting POI. He said, like, what's your yardstick of being objective? We will try as much as possible. Our yardstick is the government can be honest. If the government honestly gets confused, that's fine. They are the government making a conscious decision to be scarier or to underwhelm, which Jan conceded at the start they would do. We say the government's only obligation is to the truth, and that's how it should always be, or what the government honestly thinks is the truth at that point. They have to support manipulation. We said manipulation is bad, whatever level of manipulation, right? Even if it's just your advertising, because we think these visceral images are problematic. And here's when their responses got wishy-washy. We said that people get traumatized. They say, no, they won't get traumatized. They're used to these terrible images. If they're used to the terrible images, they're not going to work for your purpose, guys. That's a problem. Secondly, we said, like, look, people are going to develop stereotypes. You're going to harm them in the short term, harm them in the long term. Shafiq's brilliant response was, look, they'll check alternative media. iknowrealafrica.com, right? And if these are people who are already checking out iknowrealafrica.com, they don't need to see your real images, or your real images will not work. You can't have it both ways. It's called a contradiction. Finally, we said that, and this from the start, that people will distrust the government. And they said, no, they won't, because the government will tell the truth. But then just tell the truth. Then don't have to exaggerate, don't do visceral images. Then the government becomes like everybody else. Tells what the government thinks is their version of the truth, right? But from the government's perspective of the truth, of every media organization's perspective of the truth. So which side's been more consistent in terms of how people are going to react? It has to be the opposition. But now let's take all the stuff aside and say, like, what about how will people react? Is it real that people can't make some of these rational decisions? That sometimes they don't have the ability to think long term because there's like some hyperbolic curve of rationality and all these things. We think that's a little bit patronizing, actually. We think people do have this ability, given the information. If they don't have that ability, it's the government's fault for not giving them or developing the ability of these individuals to develop that in the long term. And if that's the case, you're not helping them develop rationality. If you don't do it, you can't force it. And we said this also from the start. That's the principle that we've defended quite clearly in our version of the social contract, Mr. Speaker. We said that individuals get to decide to do what they want to do, even if that means it works out worse for themselves, right? I'm not stopping you from harming someone else, Mr. Speaker, but if you do something that ends up drowning under tsunami, if you do something that means you end up getting Ebola, those are consequences of decisions you've made based on your rationality and your understanding of the facts. And that's the type of government that we would rather live in on this side of the house. Because every government is made up of individuals who think their rationality is better than everybody else's. Although in this case, opposition is better.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reply Speaker. And we ask the government to give its reply speech, which will be given by Dan in
I'm kind of disturbed by that.
Can you physically be there and I will talk from here?
What do they call that? The puppet thing. Alright. Mr. Chair, for a team that hates exaggeration so much, it's amazing that the entire opposition's case is actually an exaggeration of everything. Right? Let's start with the first exaggeration. saying that we have to defend lying. That's Logan's characterization of what our case is. Such an unfair burden. And in fact, the motion doesn't say anywhere that you have to defend lying. In fact, the motion talks about exaggeration. And we've been very clear about it. What is exaggeration? We've never moved the pole of what our yardstick is. We're saying that the report of the truth using the visual image where the focus is on the situation. And we've been very consistent about that. So let's look at the first question. Does this instant mandate a response? And we think that it's different than when a government has a political agenda and creating an issue and there is none and lying to the people and creating mass panic. We think that is different. The very fact is that an epidemic disease is a clear and present danger, something that they've conceded to. We agree that, and they agree, when there is danger, you need to create government response. So like sitting in a house during a tsunami is stupid. And we think, it is stupid. And if the government can do something about it, should they? We think they should. And even more importantly, if a stupid decision of you sitting in your house stupidly would affect yourself, that's fine. But we've told you that a stupid decision in an epidemic disease is not going to be just your stupid decision. It's going to be your stupid decision that affects hundreds of people because these diseases have no cure, because these diseases are easily spreadable. So we think that there is a difference. 2, what is the nature of people? I.e., are they stupid? Side opposition have told you that we believe people are not stupid, but we think that the modern life has created a society where people are apathic and generally disinterested, mostly because of the way that there's an atrophy in the way that we present things, and atrophy in the way the amount of images that we get. So we are desensitized. That's why John says that you do need a mind bomb in order to galvanize people. It's not about getting them to run around crazy in the streets screaming murder. It's about getting their attention. And because of the fact that when you watch the news, the time lapse, not like a week time lapse, the time lapse where you watch the news and you process that image and information given to you, it allows people to get their interest and then make that decision. And we think that this is very important because their characterization of the people is where we think is that people are crazy and people are stupid. We don't think that that is the truth. So then, is the government justified to be selective in its information presented to the people? And we think that this is very different with governments lying and creating agendas, because we think that, first of all, there is no actual yardstick of what is objective reporting, right? It contains everything, like their idea of this truth that you want to present to the people contains everything that we want to show people, the visual image, the reality of what's happening with epidemic diseases. The only difference is the focus on where we choose to present those images. And we think that a government in this case, because you can't set a yardstick of what is really exaggerated information, we should just embrace the fact that this is where we want to focus because you want to move people to action, right? So how do you justify that as the action of an action to respond in the instances of the pandemic diseases that are now happening in Africa? How do you then get people's support when you want to go out or send millions of dollars and billions of dollars in aid to Africa? Because Sam says that, just let people help them if they want to. But the problem is, it's not happening. The current situation in Africa is that the aid is not happening, the medication is lacking, the amount of help coming from Western countries is not helping. And we've shown you in the past how images are powerful in getting the response that you want, changing the types of public sentiment. And I've talked about it extensively. They've never, ever dealt with it. So the last question really is, will this work? They say it's soft and people won't care. That's not true, because we think information is too much, and the government has to be the singular origin point. With that, I'm proud to propose.
Okay, thank you, Madam Replay Speaker. And great. So, see you all tomorrow.
Right.
Or something. They're not going to announce the date until tomorrow morning, are they?
No, they're announcing